Okay, guys, and we're back with another episode of the Seth Solo Side Quest. I'm Seth from the Lonely Stoner podcast, and this is episode 56 of my side quest. Now, in this episode, we're going to be talking about the recent news how Jeremy Stephens has been re signed to the UFC. So, Jeremy Stephens is making his return to the UFC at UFC Des Moines at the Wells Fargo Arena on May 3rd. He's a UFC veteran at this point, Jeremy Stephens. He's been around for a very long time. His record currently stands at 29 wins, 21 losses in MMA. And, the fact that a guy with 21 losses can still be, signed and be fighting on the UFC fight nights and stuff does kind of speak to MMA as a whole, whereas you would never see this in boxing. I say that, but you look at the circumstances, right? So Jeremy Stephens, who's a grizzled 38-year-old veteran, a guy who's not won a fight, who's won one fight in the past 6 years. He's going to be facing a young Mason Jones, who's 29. He's 15-2. Granted, both of those losses were in the UFC, but he's experienced Cage Warriors fighter. He was on a streak at Cage Warriors until he made his UFC debut. Lost in a unanimous decision to Mike Davis. Then had a no contest. Then won a fight against David Onama in a unanimous decision, and then lost to Ludovic Klein at UFC Fight Night 208 Blades v Aspinall in 2022. Since then, he returned to Cage Warriors and won 4 fights in a row with 3 finishes. He looks like he's a natural 155er, whereas Jeremy Stephens, he's sort of been moved up to lightweight out of necessity where, when he was younger, he was a lightweight fighter and not lightweight, he was a featherweight fighter. And I would say that's where he had most of his success, but his career he's not had a ton of success throughout his entire career anyway. Of course, like many guys had a lot of experience pre-UFC, but once you reach that high level, he's, couple wins, couple losses, couple wins, couple losses. Every time he sort of had to step up. Actually, no, I would say, I take that back. He's spent most of his career at lightweight. He then moved down to featherweight later on in his career and had a bit more success until he didn't. But even, early on in his career, I'm talking, over nearly 15 years ago, he was in there with Melvin Guillard, he lost. Anthony Pettis, he lost. Donald Cerrone, lost. Eve Edwards, he lost. Cub Swanson, he lost. Charles Oliveira. Now, this is a Charles Oliveira of over 10 years ago. This is not the Charles Oliveira of today, where he was a guy who's basically one of the best in the division and one of my favourite fighters. This wasn't that Charles Oliveira. This was a much older Charles Oliveira. This is before he decided to randomly lock in and become a world champion. This was the old Charles Oliveira, and he beat him in a unanimous decision. He beat Jeremy Stephens in a unanimous decision. So, even going back 10 years, Jeremy Stephens has been a fighter who's had problems, right? And then this last run really sort of put into perspective and was like, yeah, the UFC can't, the UFC can't continue to carry this guy. So after 2018, he fights Jose Aldo, gets TKO'd. He fights Zabit Magomed Shapirov, missed that guy, loses a unanimous decision. Fights Yair Rodriguez, unanimous decision. Fights Kelvin Qatar, gets knocked out. Fights Gamrot, gets submitted. Fights Clay Collard and gets a unanimous. Oh no, he fights Clay Collard in the PFL. So after the Gamrot submission in the first round, they cut him. He then went 2-1 in the 1-2, sorry, in the PFL. He loses a unanimous decision to Clay Collard, and then wins a split decision against Miles Price. I guess whoever on earth Miles Price is. He beats him in a split decision, and then faces Nathan, who's these really weird names, Nathan Schulte, and gets submitted in the second round. Jeremy Stephens then goes on to fight in bare knuckle boxing. I haven't got his bare knuckle boxing record, but from what I hear, he actually had some success in bare knuckle boxing, likely because if you're just a tough guy who can sort of take a shot and can scrap, you can do all right in bare knuckle boxing. Whereas MMA is a lot more technical and there's a lot more facets to the game where, I might have to go back and watch that match because I can imagine Zabit Magomed Shapirov against Jeremy Stephens. Right, I'll have to go back and watch that because I can imagine that, just a levels difference in technique. And then Yair Rodriguez, the same thing as well. Just the level of difference in sort of technique I'd have to watch it, right? But Jeremy Stephens is back in the UFC. This is his first UFC fight since 2021. Obviously, he went on to have that run in PFL where he had the 3 fights. But yeah, first fight in nearly 4 years in the UFC. Obviously, his UFC records not great in terms of recency, a lot of losses. And he's facing Mason Jones, who's a guy who, sure, he's had losses in the UFC. And to be fair, I couldn't tell you the first thing about these guys who he lost to, and I couldn't tell you the first thing about those fights. But just seeing the amount of wins he's managed to stack up in Cage Warriors, it is sort of a good sign for me, because he lost a decision against Ludovic Klein. He lost a unanimous decision. Then he goes to Cage Warriors again and gets 3 TKO stoppages in a row, and then wins again in a unanimous decision in last summer. So I guess this could be a competitive fight. Don't be fooled by Mason Jones' record, and don't be fooled by Jeremy Stephens' record. Believe me, Jeremy Stephens understands that he's no spring chicken. He's 38. He's not got tons of contracts left. I would not be surprised if this guy's coming to bang. And Des Moines is his hometown as well. Jeremy Stephens is going to be in Iowa, his hometown. He may even retire after that fight. The way he was speaking on the Jackson podcast, he made it sound like he's got years and years left in the game. But and to be fair, he might do, because he's not been knocked out loads of times. He's got 21 losses. He's only been knocked out 3 times. So, respect to Jeremy Stephens. And it's MMA. Only in MMA would you get a guy who's 29 and 21 against a guy who's 15 and 2. And you're like, the guy who's got 21 losses, I wouldn't be surprised if he wins this. Now, we can see what the UFC is trying to do with this one. You're trying to bring back a hometown hero to build up one of your young big stars. I get it. I do the exact same thing, right? But let's see, because Jeremy Stephens is going to come to fight. And we all know that he's going to come to bang. He's, chin down, bite down on the mouthpiece and throw some bombs. And he's got 19 knockouts in his career. So we know he can do it. But he hasn't done it in a while. Like I said, even his last, win against Miles Price was a split decision. He hasn't knocked anyone out in 6 years. That was Josh Emmett, and that's a very good win. That win has aged very well, to be fair. That win has aged very well. So his last knockout was Josh Emmett, but let's see. Mason Jones he's got a good record, but again, he's been in the UFC and he's lost to guys who, like I said, I've never heard of. So if you're losing to those sorts of guys, we'll see. But he's still young. He's only 20. He's not that young. He's 29. He's sort of in his prime now. He's going to be Mason Jones is going to be looking to put a run together, I think. He's going to be looking to put a run together and see if he can get a ranked spot and maybe 1 or 2 big paydays before having to bow out of the sport. But it's a short career. It's a hard career. That's MMA for you. But yeah, that's it from me. Jeremy Stephens is back in the UFC. Do you think he's going to beat Mason Jones, or do you think Mason Jones is going to cause the upset in Jeremy Stephens' hometown and beat the brakes off of him? Cool. That's it from me. Another episode of the Seth Solo Side Quest in the bag, episode 56, and I'm out. Peace.